Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Bible Difficulties and Answers podcast. I'm your host, Lance Smith, and today we're diving into one of the Bible's most disturbing passages. This episode will challenge us to think deeply about how we interpret ancient texts in light of modern moral complexities. How should we view passages that seem so far removed from our understanding of right and wrong? What do we do when biblical figures act in ways that are clearly condemned elsewhere in Scripture? Today we're grappling with Genesis 19, 30 through 38, a passage that's not just challenging but deeply disturbing for many. It's a tale of survival, morality, and legacy in the aftermath of Sodom's destruction. So buckle up as we dive deep into this controversial narrative. Let's set the scene. After escaping the fiery judgment of Sodom, Lot and his daughters find themselves in a cave, isolated from the world. The daughters, shaped by the culture of Sodom, yet fearing a future without descendants, make a shocking decision. This isn't just a story of survival. It's a complex interplay of trauma, cultural influence, and moral ambiguity. So let's look at Genesis 19, 30 through 38 from the New Living Translation. And this is a tough story for our modern ears to hear. Afterward, Lot left Zoar because he was afraid of the people there, and he went to live in a cave in the mountains with his two daughters. One day, the older daughter said to her sister, "There are no men left anywhere in this entire area, so we can't get married like everyone else, and our father will soon be too old to have children. Come, let's get him drunk with wine, and then we will have sex with him. That way we will preserve our family line through our father." So that night they got him drunk with wine, and the older daughter went in and had intercourse with her father. He was unaware of her lying down or getting up again. The next morning, the older daughter said to her younger sister, "I had sex with our father last night. Let's get him drunk with wine again tonight, and you go in and have sex with him. That way we will preserve our family line through our father." So that night, they got him drunk with wine again, and the younger daughter went in and had intercourse with him. As before, he was unaware of her lying down or getting up again. As a result, both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their own father. When the older daughter gave birth to a son, she named him Moab. He became the ancestor of the nation now known as the Moabites. When the younger daughter gave birth to a son, she named him Ben-Ammi, and he became the ancestor of the nation now known as the Ammonites. Here's the issue, as outlined in the Big Book of Bible Difficulties. Incest is denounced in emphatic terms in many biblical passages. See Leviticus 18:6 and 20:17. In fact, the Lord declared, "Cursed is the one who lies with his sister, the daughter of his father, or the daughter of his mother." That's Deuteronomy 27:22. Yet, Lot committed incest with his two daughters here, from which came the nations of Moab and Ammon. Okay, it's important to recognize that not everything in the Bible is a command for how we should live. To properly interpret Scripture, we need to understand what type of literature we're reading. Is it a law? A poem? Is it meant to instruct us? Or is it just describing an event? In the case of Genesis 19, 30 through 38, the passage is descriptive. It's simply telling us what happened, not prescribing behavior. A good comparison is in Matthew 21, verses 1 and 2, where Jesus sends two disciples to fetch a donkey. This describes what happened, but it doesn't mean we're all required to go out and find donkeys for Jesus. Another fun example, often mentioned by Christian apologist Dr. Frank Turek, comes from Romans 16:13, where Paul writes, "Greet Rufus." If we treated everything in the Bible as a command, we'd be required to greet Rufus today, something that's obviously not the case. These examples show us that today's passage from Genesis is a descriptive story, not a set of instructions for us to follow. Now, let's consider how different scholars approach this, and I think we can break this down to 4 different areas. Area 1, trauma theory. Contemporary research might show the daughters were acting out from what's known as trauma theory. In a dense but interesting June 17th, 2021 article titled, "Look at What They've Turned Us Into, Reading the Story of Lot's Daughters with Trauma Theory and The Handmaid's Tale," by Kirsty Cobb. She writes this: "In such circumstances, the daughters were indeed standing before impossible decisions, none of which, in their perceived reality, provided a good outcome. Traumatized and fighting to survive, they did the unimaginable, since not continuing their father's line was not something they were willing to risk. Reading the daughters' deeds through the lens of trauma can help to explain some of the daughters' decisions via concepts of direct and insidious trauma, as well as survival behaviors and trauma reenactment. Yet, as all trauma narratives, the story leaves the audience at a place of uncertainty and ambiguity, where judging right from wrong becomes at best a complex, if not impossible, endeavor." End quote. Modern psychological perspectives, like these presented by Kirsty Cobb, suggest the daughters were acting out of immense trauma. They were caught in a survival mindset where continuing their father's lineage seemed to be the only option left in their secluded world. Area 2 is shifting blame. Still others view this story as a transference of blame, another modern lens. Elon Kutz, in an article from the National Institute of Health, National Library of Medicine, wrote this December 24th, 2005 article titled, "Revisiting the Lot of the First Incestuous Family, the Biblical Origins of Shifting the Blame onto Female Family Members," where he writes this: "If it was Lot who abused his daughters, why not openly place the responsibility of the incest where it belongs rather than pinning the blame on his daughters? Sadly, the cover-up ploy which ancient biblical narrators choose is as familiar as the act of incest itself. Abusive men have been shamelessly mouthing excuses throughout the ages. It wasn't my fault. It was she who seduced me, walking around the house like that. Besides, I didn't do it. I couldn't have. I was too drunk." Lot may be a notorious villain and a sordid weakling, but he is still the nephew of the patriarch, who is the progenitor of the nation, and hence the noble name and family honor must be preserved. The way out of this dilemma is to shift the blame onto the women." End quote. Here, the angle of blame transference discussed by Elon Kutz explained the narrative where it might subtly shift the culpability to protect the reputation of Lot, a relative of the revered Abraham. Area 3 is moral decay. From here we look to the MacArthur Study Bible, where it offers this: "The immoral philosophy of Sodom and Gomorrah had so corrupted the thinking of Lot's daughters that they unhesitatingly contrived to be impregnated by their own father. They were virgins, and there were no men left for husbands. In fearing they would have no children, they conceived the gross iniquity." So, scholars like John MacArthur point out that Sodom's influence had so corrupted their thinking that they concocted this plan without apparent moral hesitation. Area 4 is cultural influence. Here, the Bible Ref website article titled, "What Does Genesis 19:36 Mean?" says this, and I quote, "Lot apparently had not taught his daughters to seek help from the Lord or to wait for him to provide. That goes a long way to explaining their despair and scheming. At the same time, even the godless world outside of Sodom and Gomorrah would have regarded this kind of incest as wrong. The action of the daughters reflected the anything goes morality of the culture in which they were raised in. Sodom had been wiped from the face of the earth, but it had not been removed from the hearts of Lot's family. Lot had allowed his family to be deeply influenced by this cultural sin, and it certainly shaped his daughter's sense of morality." End quote. So, websites like the Bible Ref highlight how Sodom's culture had not been eradicated from their hearts, influencing their drastic actions. You know, I'm all for modern takes on old stories, but sometimes it feels like scholars, especially secular scholars, are playing a game of fit the story to the theory, especially with tales like that of Lot and his daughters. But here's the kicker. Even some big names out there have chimed in on this one. And guess what? We're diving into new atheist territory today. Take the leader of the new atheist movement, Richard Dawkins, for instance. He's not exactly known for siding with the Bible, right? But in his book, The God Delusion, he actually points out something pretty interesting about Lot's family. He says on page 240, if this dysfunctional family was the best Sodom had to offer by way of morals, some might even begin to feel a certain sympathy with God and his judicial brimstone. So get this, Richard Dawkins, right? He's not exactly the poster child for divine intervention. But even he kind of tips his hat to the notion that, hey, maybe there was something to this whole divine retribution thing with Sodom. And that quote where he says it from the God Delusion is just too good. I had to mention it in today's podcast. Let's go back to the Big Book of Bible Difficulties for their solution. There's no question that Lot sinned here in several ways, they write, to say nothing of the violation of incest laws that Moses later gave as commands to Israel. Lot was drunk, and he committed adultery with his daughters. Lot's righteous soul was vexed with many sins due to his long association with the people of Sodom. But none of these sins are approved of in this passage. Indeed, the whole colorless tone of the narrative, without any positive comment by the narrator, indicates that there was no attempt to conceal the horror of his sins. Here's a good example of the principle that not everything recorded by the Bible is approved by the Bible. All right, back to me. And this isn't just an ancient history or morality play. The consequences of these actions echo through time, with the resulting nations, Moab and Ammon, becoming adversaries to Israel, illustrating how personal sin can have communal and historical repercussions. For this, let's look at gotquestions.org and an article provocatively titled, Why Did Lot Offer Up His Daughters to be Gang Raped? The article offers this point. Why did Lot have sex with his own daughters? He got drunk. Yes, his daughters conspired to get him drunk, but Lot willingly drank, and when he was drunk, he lost what little control and common sense he had. And this is the final step in Lot's backsliding. The lesson we can learn from this is when a person has too much to drink, he does not make good choices and loses control of his morals and operates out of the sinful, carnal nature. As a result of the incest, 2 children were born, and those 2 children are the fathers of 2 nations that have been at odds with and the source of much suffering to Israel down through history, end quote. There's some good stuff we covered today, from contemporary secular research to a traditional Bible scholarship. As we come to the end of today's episode, we're reminded that not everything recorded in the Bible is prescribed for us to follow. The story of Lot and his daughters is a stark example of human failure, not divine endorsement. It serves as a warning of the destructive power of sin and the lasting consequences of moral compromise. We've explored how the Bible provides not only a mirror of humanity's brokenness, but also a clear stance against these kind of actions in later passages. This is a major point we need to remember. What the daughters of Lot intended as a way to preserve their family line ultimately led to the nations that opposed God's people and were eventually destroyed. So in actuality, Lot's daughters completely failed in getting what they wanted. What can we take away from this? First, not every action in the Bible is a model. It's essential to discern what the Bible is teaching versus what it is merely reporting. Second, the impact of culture. We're reminded of how deeply our environments can shape our moral compass. And lastly, the consequences of compromise. Lot's life shows us that moral compromise can lead to unforeseen and tragic outcomes. As we wrap up, remember the Bible doesn't shy away from showing humanity in all its complexity, warts and all. It invites us to reflect, learn, and perhaps find redemption in understanding these narratives beyond their face value. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into one of the Bible's most perplexing stories. If today's episode made you think, share it with someone who loves diving into the depths of biblical narratives. Next week, we're continuing again with the incest theme with, if incest is condemned, why did Abraham marry his sister? You won't want to miss this episode as we explore Genesis 20:12. This is a return to Abraham, as he will be the subject of our next 5 podcasts. As always, we love hearing from our listeners. You may reach us at our website, BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers.podbean.com, or you may reach out to me directly at our email address, BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers@gmail.com, with any questions, comments, concerns, fits of righteous indignation, or just to say hi. I'm always glad to hear from our listeners. Also, please like and subscribe to this podcast, tell a friend or two as well, and also write a review and give it a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, or any of your venues of choice. It really does help get the word out about the most amazing book ever written. Again, I'm Lance Smith. Until next time, I wish you good luck, good health, and God bless. So long, everybody.